This was the most thrilling space survival journey ever. As the escape pod approached the atmosphere, it began to separate in stages, ultimately hurtling towards the ground like a comet. The command center immediately captured the signal, but they found out that Joe was using a ballistic landing method, making it difficult to predict the landing site in advance. At this moment, Joe also received a signal from the command center. She struggled to open the communication button, and the command center was instantly filled with joy and encouragement the moment they heard Joe's voice. However, as the escape pod continued to accelerate, the command center lost the location signal again. They could only dispatch a large number of personnel to search within the estimated range of the fall. Shortly after, the escape pod landed at a safe altitude, and the deployed parachute gripped it tightly like the arm of a giant. With a loud bang, Joe finally landed successfully. When she woke up from unconsciousness and opened the hatch, Joe greedily breathed in the long-lost air, only to see a wild wolf approaching her. She froze in fear, but just as the wolf was about to pounce on her, a gunshot rang out in the distance. It turned out to be the search and rescue team, and a large number of medical and armed personnel surrounded Joe protectively. It wasn't until she saw the figures of Magnus and Alice that she felt a sense of relief. However, the commander's family wasn't so fortunate. All they received was his cold body. And Henry's greatest concern was still the newly discovered substance. He eagerly started up the instruments to examine the experimental data inside, but he didn't notice that the substance was emitting an eerie glow. At this moment, Joe was contentedly watching Alice, but the next moment there was only Alice left on the helicopter. She stood up and looked around, realizing that the whole world had become empty and Joe had encountered the same situation. However, when she turned her head, Alice's figure reappeared, except her expression became somewhat vacant. When Joe instinctively spoke Dutch, Alice seemed completely unable to understand, and Magnus had no idea what was happening. As Alice watched Joe lying in the MRI for examination, she inexplicably thought that her mother was already dead. At the press conference the next day, reporters kept pressing for the cause of the space accident. When Joe was about to respond, her colleague immediately intervened, saying that the joint investigation was still ongoing and there was nothing to disclose at the moment. Joe just wanted to end it all as soon as possible and enjoy life with her family. However, the Joint Space Command headquarters explicitly required Joe to stay at the base and not go anywhere until the cause of the accident was thoroughly investigated. Under various pressures, a grand accident investigation hearing was officially launched, with all 4 surviving astronauts present. The head of the investigation team, Irina, was affiliated with the Russian Space Agency. When she heard that Joe witnessed the impact on the space station caused by the body of a female Soviet astronaut from the 1960s, she immediately reasoned that it couldn't be possible. How could a corpse float in space full of debris for decades? Moreover, the Joint Command had never received any reports of astronauts dying or missing in the nearby area. She believed that the so-called female corpse was just a hallucination caused by Joe's lack of oxygen. Both sides refused to back down because once the impact object was confirmed to be the Soviet female corpse, Russia would bear the main responsibility for the accident. Later, Joe returned to the dormitory for a meal and noticed that Magnus had changed his hairstyle, which she really liked. Magnus seemed uncomfortable, as the old Joe had never complimented him like this before. However, later that night, while Joe was on her way to the bathroom with Alice's assistance, she accidentally fell down. She asked Alice to go find Magnus for help. When Joe turned her head, she found that the corridor had suddenly transformed into the one she had encountered on the space station. At the end of the corridor, the bracelet necklace still hung, and even when Magnus ran over to help her up, the eerie corridor remained unchanged. In the laboratory on the other side, Henry was confidently introducing the newly discovered substance to his assistant. He explained how, at the moment of collision, the substance could generate dual quantum signals, but it was difficult to record them. He wanted to conduct another experiment at the base, but the entire afternoon passed, and the substance showed no signs of change. The assistant, holding almost blank data, persuaded Henry not to waste any more effort, but he insisted that he had seen the data before. Just yesterday, when he retrieved the instrument, he did indeed detect the dual quantum state, exactly like the data in the space station laboratory. Stubborn Henry ignored his assistant's skeptical look and kept watch at the monitoring instrument. Near midnight, the mysterious dual quantum signal finally appeared. He tried to record it with his phone but found that it couldn't display on the screen. He had to resort to pen and paper, sketching the dual quantum state in a simplified form. The next day, Henry excitedly showed it to his assistant, only to be praised for his drawing skills. Dejected, Henry left the laboratory, failing to notice that the substance in the instrument was emitting light again. His attention was completely drawn to the strange phenomenon downstairs. A girl in black had just run into the garage, followed by another girl of similar build carrying a toy rabbit. It turned out that Alice was playing hide-and-seek with the daughter of the deceased commander. When Alice saw the girl throw her beloved doll on the ground and stomp on it, she quickly intervened. However, the girl and the doll disappeared. Alice questioned her, but the girl accused Alice of distorting the truth just to reclaim her doll. When Alice picked up the toy to inspect it, there was no trace of dirt on it. Alice was pondering what had happened when Henry approached and initiated a conversation about quantum physics. Obviously, he had sensed something earlier and intended to enlighten Alice. Henry stated that many phenomena in this world cannot be explained by classical physics theories. For instance, the same thing can exist in two different states simultaneously, just like the rabbit appears white in one world and may be gray in another. And there exists a critical space between two worlds, where the color of the rabbit can switch between white and gray at any moment. Alice listened, seeming to grasp the concept vaguely, while Henry's experiment with the newly discovered substance aimed to simulate the dual quantum state in the critical space, where objects could appear in two different states simultaneously. And Jo faced her second hearing. This time, Irina brought more convincing evidence. Based on the style of the spacesuit Jo provided, she found the space garbage bag thrown out by the space station in the 1970s. The two looked remarkably similar, leading to the possibility that Jo, under immense pressure, mistook the garbage bag for a body. Jo was rendered speechless this time. After the hearing, a colleague came to comfort her, expressing his support. He even attempted to touch Jo's face, but she recoiled, surprising the colleague with her reaction. The next morning, Jo and the other 3 astronauts prepared to pay their respects to the deceased commander. Jo still insisted she hadn't made a mistake. She even found a photo of the same style spacesuit online. A colleague reminded her that the astronaut in the photo was Irina. Jo was speechless with astonishment. After paying respects to the commander, she wanted to stay alone for a while. However, as she stood up, she saw the deceased commander in front of her, but after taking a closer look, there was nothing there. At the following hearing, Jo straightforwardly admitted to Irina's inference, stating that what she saw was indeed a space garbage bag because she no longer wanted to stay there. Finally returning home after a long time, Jo felt everything was so familiar, except she was curious about when Magnus changed the car at home was clearly red before. However, Magnus insisted the car had always been blue. On the other side, Irina knocked on Henry's door. So, they were not only colleagues at work, but had also undertaken missions together in space. Their personal relationship was also extraordinary. Henry learned that she had cancer and didn't have much time left. He wanted to cherish the few meetings they had left, but when emotions ran deep, Irina turned into a corpse. Meanwhile, on a cruise ship, another Henry summoned a detective who had been investigating him. He brought the detective to the deck, claiming he had never experienced a space accident in his life. However, the detective said that in a space station accident 30 years ago, it was highly likely that Henry had killed 2 colleagues. Henry's rage ignited, and he pushed the detective into the sea.